A monster from their peninsula almost became the king. She heard that it was an incredibly close match with the current monster king. Si-woo says that it was quite regrettable then. She agrees, and what was more interesting was that he was also a Dakibi from the goblin species like he was. Of course, they were so strong that in the entire history of the monsters living on the peninsula, there was no one that could rival them. Even hearing that, Si-woo did not even know he was a monster up until yesterday. Truthfully, there was still a part of him that wondered what that all was. He thinks that he spent every minute thinking that he wishes he could wake up quickly and if this was a dream. Really, Solmi questioned as he had adapted quite well for someone who spoke that way. Solmi explains that even when she met him for the first time earlier and heard his resolve, that left quite an impression on her. And while he had made his resolve, she suggests that it might not be so bad to set his goal a bit higher too. Higher? Si-woo asks. Solmi says that the humans being threatened by the resetting of the laws with the ruler that he was afraid of. In that case, she suggests that he be the next monster king and maintain the current rules for the next 666 years. Hearing these shocks, Si-woo asked her if he could ask her something. She says he could question her whatever he feels like, and if he is curious about something, then she would try to answer to the best of her knowledge. It was not much, but the Shutterwalk monster storage next to her. Just now, it had been flashing like that. That she tells him that it was an emergency order. It reached out to the monsters in the area whenever there is a serious situation. If an emergency order is sent down to the human world, the only reason why that would happen is because that some monster broke the rules, or they harmed a human. But well, something like that had not happened in a few decades. She smiles and tells that there was no way that an emergency order would. Then she realizes that there really has been an emergency in the area. It is already night. Si-woo is in his apartment. He summons the scroll, and just like he was taught, he puts his hand it and takes out the goblin treasure given to him. He then wore it on his hand, but he had no idea how to use it. He thinks that he will have to ask how to use it later. He looks at the time, it was 9:56. He remembers Solmi leaving early for the emergency call. She looks at the time and calculates the time that Si-woo needed to go back to the Yokai realm. She told him that she would be back by 10 and that he should wait there for her. He says all right. With a smile on her face, she told Si-woo that they were friends now, so he could just call her Solmi when she gets back. In the end, it was past 10. Si-woo wonders if something happened. If he knew that this would happen, he thinks that he would have surely gotten her number at least. He then looks at his parents' photos and thinks that if he had goblin blood in his blood, that it would probably have been from his father's blood. He remembers that the old man had said that he was probably a 4th or a 5th generation. Only he was just only a bit mixed. He then again looks at his father's picture and thinks if father knew that he himself was of goblin blood, or just then he senses something. Who was that? Solmi? Outside in the alley, a man was being chalked by a black curse like Yokai. He is then shot from behind. It was Solmi. She had been catching it again and again, and yet there was no end in sight. At that rate, she was really not going to have any feathers left. She asks the Yokai what it was wriggling about, as it did not even feel pain. It then dashed away Solmi. She looks at the scared man and tells him not to worry, as his friend was going to be all right and the injury was not that deep. She holds the bleeding man and tells that she had put on a salve to stop the bleeding, and she says that the ambulance would be there soon. But the man was looking at her terrified. It was the Yokai from earlier. It was huge. She felt the pressure and then looked back. The monster was dashing at her, but it was sliced through the middle. She was confused. Just then someone comes ahead telling her to keep her head, and because the day that rumors spread that she had been beaten by that sort of thing will be the day that her entire family won't be able to go around with their head held high. Solmi smiles and says that it is not a family with a good reputation to begin with, and she knew that he would be behind her. She calls him his Appa. He asks why she was calling him her Appa. She smirks and says that it is because he was closer to her and was a bit older, and if he did not like it she says that she would call him by his name Goyu. Pointing at the human, he asks if there was an option for her to call him in a polite and courteous manner. He then just tells her to call him whatever he wants. He then brainwashes the human, starting to think of today as simply unlucky as a car that appeared at the alleyway hit him and his friend, and the driver ran away in hurry until the ambulance comes. Si-woo looks at him using the hypnosis magic and states that it is the magic that he inherited from his family. She also states that she heard that it was really hard as she tried to learn it from Si-woo, but she just got scolded and she gave up. He then asks if it meant that she was a front runner. There were 2 of these things in this alley. He asks her how many she had caught until now. Solmi tells that including this one she had caught a total of 24, and there was not a proper monster among them. They were all shutterwalks on leashes controlled by someone. Just from what she shows they had killed 7 and injured over 50. Who the hell was behind all this? She tells him that she was sure that they were aware of how heavy the crime of maiming humans is. What sort of amusement they were getting? Goyu tells her that she was wrong, as it was not for amusement but for gain. They were killing humans for some gain. Solmi tells him that she did not get it. Goyu states that was reasonable, as it was not something well known to their generation. Since the olden days humans have been eaten by the yokai. And it was not just to satisfy their sadism or appetite either. They consume human blood and flesh because that itself is an incredibly potent and healthy food to the monsters. Solmi could not believe it, as she had never heard of something like that until now. Goyu tells her that it was a widely known fact a long time ago, something that was not passed on to their generation. Yokai could easily become strong eating human meat. If that truth was known, then the human world would not be as quiet as it is now. Goyu adds that she probably knows it well, since she had taken the qualification test, as there are many instances where younger kids like them, not even 500 years old yet, that would choose to struggle to take that complicated test. Unless they were oddballs like him or her, as it was a boring and frustrating place where there is no real need to go in and out until the law changes. That was their generation's perception of humans. But at that current moment, when they were nearing the festival, everyone was searching desperately to be even the littlest bit stronger. There were monsters who are aware of the secret regarding humans and are willing to take the risk. She should have known some risk takers, as she was helping Grandpa Boogeyman, that in recent days there have been many that have destroyed themselves by going too fat trying to get their power. Not understanding was not a motive but a mindset. And Goyu says that if it was him, he would have never created this sort of mess. Rather than attracting attention by using evil spirits that can't even move delicately, he would have done it himself, swiftly and surely capturing them one by one before eating them. Si-woo says that they must be extremely pathetic cowards, but would a coward who is not even be able to attack humans who cannot resist be bold enough to move themselves? Goyu answers that even if they were evil spirits, if they have the spirit to call forth hundreds, then they may think that it is safer to do that than it is to step forward themselves. Si-woo then tells Goyu to go and tells them where something, that instead of acting like a bastard who is desperate for attention, just properly. Just then she realizes something that shocks her. She then flies away from there, telling Goyu to clean up. Goyu looks at her confused. Si-woo was on the balcony, but it was odd. He was sure that it was closed just a second ago. He looks around. There was someone inside the house. He slowly sneaks from the back to Si-woo. He thinks that it was easy, and if he knew that he would be this defenseless, then he would not have gone out of his way to put in that much effort. He then attacks Si-woo, but to the killer's shock, Si-woo manages to dodge it. He then grabs the killer's hand. The killer notices something. Si-woo then throws him out of the balcony with the lighting stab. Si-woo had thought that his heart was going to leap out of his chest. It was not exactly an ability, but one of the goblin's characteristics was that the goblin could rarely get beaten twice with the similar tactic. Back then, the chilling coldness he felt just before the impact. If he had not recognized the same sensation, he would have been utterly defenseless against it. He thinks that he unconsciously threw it down below. He hoped that no one got caught in the whirlwind. Just as the smoke clears, he sees that there was no one there. He hears a noise from his back telling him not to worry, as he had put all the humans nearby to sleep. As if they all start screaming at once, dealing with the aftermath would have been inconvenient for him. He chocks Si-woo with his tail and asks if he was really a zombie, as despite not having an overwhelming power, he knew how to hit quite strongly for subject, and that was not so powerful in itself. He then jumps, pulling Si-woo with him. Si-woo struggles to get out. The man smiles and then slams him in the ground. Si-woo is shaking, trying to get up. The man had not intended to fall that far. He had not expected the foundation to weaken when he felt earlier. He then stands up and says the humans probably attributed to shoddy construction or a gas explosion, something like that. For those who live here, their property values might drop a bit. Yokai that harms humans and soul me who had not returned. The culprit behind both problems was the men right in front of him. Si-woo had understood this too, and in addition he had sensed it. He was facing an unbelievable danger right now. The man tells Si-woo that struggling would just be a nuisance, so Si-woo should better just let him eat him right there. Si-woo just looked at him. The man said not to look at him like that, as he assures him that it was not something that would harm him. He states that there is quite a stark difference between him and Si-woo as a supernatural being. He says that struggling would only lead to a more agonizing death, and the outcome is going to be same, so Si-woo should give up and avoid unnecessary suffering. He then takes out the picture of Si-woo and his mom and tells Si-woo that he will spare his mother if he surrenders. This makes Si-woo very angry, and he attacks that man. He hits him in his face. He pulls that man holding his jacket, and just then when he was about to punch, he stops and starts shaking. The man tells him that it was just a provocative tactic and was a bit excessive too. But another provocative line did not come to his head. His technique was venom. Its power was not that bad, but to activate it, direct contact was necessary. He thinks of this ability as quite trashy, as it would not work on someone stronger than him, and tells Si-woo that Si-woo needed to use his wits against him to barely get through. He had heard that some with noble lineage could render opponents immobile with just a glance. Si-woo was shaking in pain. He felt very weak, as if it is being pressed by scissors. The man looks down at Si-woo and tells him that the world is unfair, and within the set rules, the weak are only fit to be devoured. Si-woo thinks if he could only use what was on his wrist. The man then throws the photo and turns into a snake, stating that the calamity does not wait until one is ready, and tells Si-woo to remember this in his mind for his next life. Completely unable to move, that was not the case. If it is just a single move, Si-woo felt like it could be possible somehow. The snake comes to attack him. Si-woo with his sheer will manages to gather some mana in his fist. Seeing this, the snake was shocked. Si-woo then punches the snake with all he had. This makes a hole in the window. The snake says that he almost got into some serious trouble just then. He then swings his tail to hit Si-woo. This sends Si-woo flying. Despite the venom taking effect, such relentless persists. A goblin was truly a goblin. The snake then notices something. There was a sword stabbed in his stomach. He looked down and another sword was there. Someone chants 9 heavens radiant origin, thunderous voice transmuter of Bodhisattva. The snake is hit with huge thunderbolts. That person then goes to that snake man telling him that his night had not come yet. Si-woo was confused and looks at that person. He tells the snake man how he could stoop so low, a miserable excuse for beings not even worth bugs. The snake man says to the person unnecessarily exerting force was speaking with power, a trademark of the human exorcists. With pain, the snake man asks who taught him to talk like that. The snake man thinks while he had managed to buy some time, it was not enough to be caught in a trap, and how did they sense the hint and arrive so quickly? No, what was more that it was dangerous. His aura is distinctly difficult from ordinary shamans. Setting aside the question of whether victory possible, and as he lingers here any longer it would truly be disastrous. Dealing with that cunning crow woman is already a challenge, but if that guy come, even if he was awake after death, the snake man would not be able to defeat him. So, he plans to run away from there. He wanted to save his full power until the end if possible. He then sends his evil spirits toward him. The snake man says that back when everything was peaceful, that guy was causing havoc in the western lands. He did not know how that evil spirit ended up like that, but normally he would have equivalent to at least a pet class yokai. The snake man with a grin on his face tells the person to have a good time playing with that spirit, as that spirit was quite a fitting opponent for someone who was so desperate to show off while he finishes up the mean that was interrupted. The spirit gathers a beam on his mouth to attack. The person also dashed toward the spirit. The monster releases the beam, the person dashes toward the monster. He blocks the beam with his sword and deflects it, and then slashes the monster in a single shot. The snake man is totally shocked seeing. But before he realized the person attacks him, he hit him with a sword to his head. The snake man was on his knees. Si-woo was in shock seeing this. The person then looks down to Si-woo and says to him that it seemed that they were not on the same side with that guy, and if he wanted to save his life it was best to answer honestly without hiding anything when asked. Si-woo, smiling, asks what he was doing there. He could not believe his ears hearing that familiar voice. He stands up and asks what exactly he was doing there and asks if he recognized his voice. He then takes off his mask and, in shock, asks if he is Choi Si-woo. The person behind the mask was his friend Yushin. Yushin asks what on earth was with that appearance. Si-woo smiles and tells Yushin that it would take a while to explain all that. A long time.
Thank you for joining us in this recap journey. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. Comment if you have suggestions, want more of the series. Don't forget to share it with your friends. Do subscribe if you want more similar content. This is Universe Nexus, your passport to the immersive realms of anime and manga.